So right now, there's two fighters that are in like a fork in the road, I guess you can say. They're like in the middle of the road in their career. Both are coming off of pretty bad losses, both going for greatness. Both haven't fought since 2023, and both are currently rumored to potentially be back in the mix to eventually fight somebody. And both are seen in training camp right now. And depending on how things go, these two fighters can end up seeing each other in the ring. What two fighters am I talking about? Jermell Charlo and Errol Spence. The Iron Man versus the Shark. Now, we've seen some footage on social media of these two training separately, and rumors are flying around that, they got names being thrown at them and potential opponents and stuff like that. I know Jermell Charlo was offered a few people, and all it is going on while Lamont Roach and Pitbull Cruz is also being talked about. We got two fighters here, man, and they're actually rumored to be fighting each other. When I heard of Errol Spence versus Jermell Charlo, right, being potentially made, I was like, man, like that's a good fight. That's a really good matchup. And that's something that like anybody would want to see, right? As a boxing fan, that's a great fight. That's an absolutely amazing fight. The heights that Jermell Charlo has reached in the sport, and Errol Spence being the shark in the water, for such a long time and beating all these guys and being rumored to have beaten up Floyd Mayweather Jr. in a sparring match. This is a really good fight, to think about and predict and imagine. And so that's what I did. I predicted and I imagined it, and I got a conclusion for y'all. So I'm gonna give it to y'all, give it up to y'all. But before we do that, my name is Dolo Ren, MMA boxing content creator, the most uncompromised, the most honest, and the realest. Only here. You dig? So that's my intro. And before this video, I uploaded a video about Tank Davis being a complete coward for fighting Jake Paul and not rematching Lamont Roach and fighting all the other guys he was supposed to fight. And I uploaded another video called Canelo Will Break Terrence Crawford. Yes, that's my prediction in a nutshell. Canelo will break Terrence Crawford's ribs in round 9. I break it down in that video as well. Yeah, go check them videos out. I'm gonna put it up in the links, right corner, I think. I think it's this corner. Yeah, that corner. And you can go check that out. You can click on my page and check out the other videos as well. Check out Productive Conversations podcast with my boy Matt Brown. We do a lot of stuff over there. I cover UFC events over there. I cover a lot of stuff over there too. So, check them out, get them a follow, get them a view. We got Jermell Charlo at 5'11" height with a 73-inch reach. And we got Errol Spence at 5'9" height with a 72-inch reach. So Jermell Charlo will have the weight and the size advantage. Only slightly though, very slightly in each category. And based on how they fight and based on their game plan, it might not make a difference. And I'll break it down right now. First off, I want to say that like this fight happening, like if this fight is potentially gonna happen, it really should be tune-up fights for each of these guys before it happens. Because I don't think either one should just be getting in the ring fighting, like each one has to fight a beast and the other man, on their return. Like, do you really want to fight Errol Spence on your return fight, regardless of the car crash or regardless of whatever? Do you really want to fight Charlo after being off for like 2+ years? Charlo's a large task to take on, especially if Spence wants to go up to 154 like he was talking about. He did the face off with Gabriel Fundora, whatever. Oh, I'm tripping. That's his sister. I'm tripping. Steven Fundora. It made it seem like he was about to fight him next or whatever, but we don't know if that's going to happen. But either way, that's another tall order for Spence as well. What I'm saying is that each of these fighters should get a tune-up before this fight happens, if it's going to happen. Because this is a hell of a fight, and you'll see why when I break it down. When I compare their strengths and their weaknesses and what they bring in and what they don't bring. For Spence, I was watching, the Kell Brook fight. That showed me a lot. Kell Brook was one of my favorite fighters ever. I really liked Kell Brook a lot. Eventually I want to do a video on him. But I was looking at that fight, the you guys fight, the Danny Garcia fight, even the Crawford fight. I had to look up to see, some of his weaknesses, I guess you could say. I was laser focused on Errol Spence versus Sean Porter for the reason being that this was the last fight before Errol Spence got into that car crash. You can't really expect Errol Spence to be back in fighting form prior to 2019 after such a horrible wreck. But he came back and beat Garcia and you guys, right? So like he came pretty good. I just feel like, with Sean Porter, right? Against Sean Porter, like Sean Porter did a lot of damage to him, like he was the first one to cut him. Sean Porter was the first fighter to cut Errol Spence. I think like round 4 or 5, Sean Porter landed the most shots against Spence in a single round. And then around like round 5 or 6 or something, like Sean Porter ended up throwing more punches against Errol Spence than any other fighter he's ever faced. So I thought that was a great fight to watch to learn how he'd fight an orthodox kind of guy. Not exactly, definitely not a fighter like Jermell Charlo, but close enough and something that would tell you a lot. And for Charlo, I was watching, just to reiterate it, I'm comparing the best versions of these fighters because that's what I expect to see when they come back. If if a training camp or a trainer is going to sign off on this fight to let them fight, commission's going to allow it to happen. They should be at their best, and there should be no excuses. You guys have been out for a long time. It's not like that's what we're going to get. Maybe I'm being too optimistic, but like that's what I'm basing it off of. Their primes versus their primes and what they should be coming in as. Because in reality, it would be a really tough fight to put together right now. But when they're ready, this should absolutely be a fight that happens. Absolutely. Covering I'm mostly going to be covering Charlo versus Jackson. I will mention Charlo versus Harrison too, but Charlo versus Jackson is what I really wanted to use to compare because I thought that was a really good fight. I thought, this was Charlo's opportunity to become a champion and that's what he did and he looked really good in that fight. Showed, some of his best colors, and was able to overcome a lot of obstacles in that fight as well. So, yeah, we're going to be talking about both of these fights, Charlo versus Jackson and Errol Spence versus Sean Porter. And we're going to be mentioning other fights as well. So let's get into it. And I'll start off with Charlo and what I've noticed in his fights, and particularly the John Jackson fight. So with Charlo, right, he'll throw like a really good like 1-2, right, a really good jab cross. He'll maneuver around the ring a lot. His shots are a little bit inaccurate because he's just trying to make contact with you and he's trying to put pressure on you and trying to score and get you off balance and off your game. They're still hard shots, and a lot of them go through. He uses the ring a lot. He does maneuver a lot. He does maneuver, and he has a really good pivot. He pivots. He has that orthodox pivot to the outside, and it works really well because he does it really smooth. And he'll throw in like if he has you against the ring, I mean against the ropes or the corner, he'll like do it to like throw an uppercut or like a slick hook or get to the side of you and start throwing. Yeah, Charlo's good at that. Charlo's good at that pivot and getting to the side of you and throwing in a really hard single shot, which he's also good at, like uppercuts and the clinch. And he has a really good right hand, man. He has a really good right hand. And he fights similar to Spence in a way. He's like an orthodox Spence in a sense, but just not as much pressure. He does fight kind of tall. He fights behind that shoulder. He doesn't give you a lot of looks or work a lot of angles. But he's different in the sense that he doesn't pressure as much as Spence, where Spence will just constantly be pressuring you. Spence will constantly be on you, and he has a good pivot as well, but he mostly pivots on the inside. He'll pivot to get more closer and inch his way into the body more so he can land some hard hooks and leverage himself, with some pullbacks. That's, Spence, but I'll get to Spence in a second. But back to Charlo, like Charlo, man, he's a good fighter. And when he puts his combos together, they are well. They are very well. And that's what, he has in common with Spence as well. What I was noticing about Charlo is that he does get hit to the body a lot. I saw that with, the Harrison fight. I saw that with the Harrison 2 fight. I saw that when he was fighting John Jackson. With Charlo, he has fast hands, fast feet. He showed that in the Harrison 2 fight when, Harrison was gloating and, showboating. And then Charlo just came out of nowhere, came back into the scene and then just started putting it on him and put him away. That was pretty awesome to see. And even when like, he's fighting on the inside with someone, he'll use his space, he'll work around. He tries to use as much space as possible. He's never like stationary. That's one thing to say. He's never stationary. And just like Spence, he has a really good jab. He's very resilient and he has stamina for days. Like sometimes Spence might look a little more tired, but like they both got pretty damn good stamina. Now, I'll get into some of the negatives about Charlo. Like with Charlo, right? Like, like I said before, he's not super accurate. Sometimes he'll just throw the shots out just to land them on the glove or whatever. And that could hurt him, as far as scoring. He's not always focused on scoring as much as he should be, probably. He bides his time out, he bides his time. He likes to circle around the ring a little bit too much. Like he'll engage and then back off, then re-engage and back off. He does that a lot. And I think it would suit him more to just, stay in that pocket more and just really learn how to work a little more coming forward. He's not very good fighting on his back foot. It's one thing I noticed, he's just not that great, throwing shots backwards and if you can get him on his back foot, you're in a better position. Also, something I noticed is that in Charlo's fights, he doesn't really get right to it. He kind of needs some time to warm up, and that can hinder him against somebody that will come forward, really fast and explosively in the first few rounds. And it has. And, not that he gets tired later on, he gets more active as he goes on through the fight. But, if you have somebody that could put some good body work on him like Canelo did, then you can beat Charlo. And that's another thing too, like Canelo's, coming from a lower weight class, technically, right? Going to fight Charlo at 160, like, it just shows that, a smaller guy can really put some good work in on Charlo. Maybe due to being a little bit shorter or something, just focusing on that body attack. Pressuring Charlo will get him off his game well enough to where you can have some really good success. And he also doesn't really cut off the ring. Like if you notice, like he won't really cut off the ring. Sometimes he'll throw a jab and kind of try to chase you, but he's not the best at cutting off the ring. I would say Errol Spence is better at cutting off the ring. And ultimately, he's a guy that fights on the outside pretty damn well, but just doesn't fight on the inside as well. So if you mix that body onslaught with that pressure and just staying in the pocket, you can have some good success against Charlo. When it comes to Errol Spence, I studied a bunch of his fights for this prediction. There was one fight that I needed to study, the Sean Porter fight, which I explained before. And I thought, honestly, this was a really good performance from Sean Porter when he fought Spence. Like, this is a really, really good performance. He did great against Spence. He really did. So, yeah, like, I studied a bunch of his fights, but Errol Spence, just like Charlo, has similar tendencies in other fights. Just like Charlo, Spence has tendencies that he shows throughout all his fights for the most part. Certain things that they do all the time. And against Sean Porter, I feel like, it was a really good fight and it was the best one. And I was able to see like a lot of what he does on display because he had to do a lot when he fought Sean Porter. Because, Sean Porter was coming forward. Sean Porter was very active, had a high output, was putting shots together. He was very successful with the lead right hand against Errol Spence, doing pivots in certain moments, that was kind of catching Spence off guard and off balance. But ultimately, Errol Spence did a great job fighting Sean Porter. He was able to drop him. He was able to really keep him at bay and land really hard shots to the body. Like Errol Spence had one thing I realized was like Errol Spence has a really good body onslaught. He fights tall behind the shoulders. He fights in that southpaw stance, so it's always tricky for an orthodox fighter. He's a guy that like he lives in the pocket. Like he loves fighting in the pocket. He'll jab you up, he'll set you up for a cross to the body, but he'll also level change with that cross. With that left cross. Eventually, you don't know if it's coming upstairs or downstairs, but he'll be able to land it with good accuracy. He's decently fast and decently powerful, but not really. That's not really his best attributes. I think his best attributes are his body onslaught, his pressure, his defensive responsibility, and his jab. That's what I really think he's good at, and staying in the pocket and really putting the work on you and not letting up. So that's what I saw in the Sean Porter fight. There was some point in round three where I saw Spence was like putting him in like half clinches just to land really hard left hands. That's something that Spence can do to you if you're a fighter that's like shorter than him. So that won't be something that I think he would do against Charlo. He wouldn't be able to kind of manhandle him and get him in like the half clinches and just land on him at will. Is just he mixes it up a lot, you know what I mean? Like another thing I noticed in that round three against Sean Porter was that Spence has a decent like step back counter. He'll step back, counter you, and then he'll just leverage himself back to the body. It's like he gravitates toward his opponent. He's less so caring. He doesn't really care that much about the center of the ring or anything like that. He's just really trying to get at you and really just like chop you down like a tree. Like the thing about Spence though, he fights good on his back foot. He fights very good on his back foot. I can't lie. He fights pretty damn good. He doesn't use a lot of angles, but like he'll hit you with something and then like stifle your momentum, come forward so that he could keep landing on you more so, doing his game plan, fighting on the inside, landing the body shots and breaking you down, putting the pressure on you. He's very good at fighting backwards and then just he's also very good at getting back to where he does his best work, which is the inside. He'll just always find a way to get back there. He'll even use his head to like get in your chest and then like just throw like wide hooks to the body. He'll put his head in your chest, right? And he'll just throw wide hooks to the body that you can't really see, and they're all landing with conviction. He's pretty good at cutting off the ring. Like he has more of like a trotting kind of movement, prodding, trotting. I don't know the word, but he's not like constantly shuffling. He's just more like prodding and kind of waiting and biding his time as he approaches you to pick his shots. And he cuts the ring off with a nice hook too. So he's able to hit you and score while he's trying to cut the ring off on you. Something he does good. Something akin to Canelo, which we'll get back to in a second. With Errol Spence, he doesn't really work his pivot at all, but like when he does pivot, he'll pivot like on the inside of his opponent. Usually if it's an orthodox opponent, so like he'll pivot to his left or whatever. And he'll do that just to get good leverage to go back to the body. Like he really gravitates toward that body work, and that's like his bread and butter. And he'll put it behind jabs and mix in really sneaky crosses with it. Like Errol Spence is a really tough fighter, yo. He's a really tough fighter. He doesn't have to be the strongest or the fastest, but he's very accurate, relentless, and defensively responsible. The things that, Spence gets in trouble with, like what I noticed against Sean Porter, was that Sean Porter was able to land some lead right hands that were pretty hard. And he just kind of kept landing them. I think Porter kind of realized that at some point. And once again, give some respect to Sean Porter for going 12 rounds with Errol Spence, man. Like he really gave him some good work. And one thing is like, if you pivot towards Spence's left hand, which I noticed that Sean Porter was doing in round five. It's kind of like you're nullifying his left hand. He doesn't have as much leverage to throw it, and he doesn't have that much space to like set it up and really land it well like he wants. So that kind of gets him off his game too. When um when you like kind of close the distance on his left hand, so then he's only able to really work with the right at least at like a long distance, at like an outside distance. When you put pressure on a fighter, it can open them up, because then they got to fight back or they'll be on their back pedal, which is never fun to see. But if you're pressuring a fighter and you're making them fight, like they're going to be more open. And that's where Spence really leaves himself more open when he's like fighting in that clinch. Like, just having his head like in your chest like that leaves him susceptible to uppercuts too. So, yeah, that's something, he's able to deal with pressure, but that's where he really is most vulnerable, is when he's in the rumbles, when he's in the pocket and, on the inside trying to do his work. It's his best work, but, it keeps him vulnerable to certain shots that certain people could get off on him. There's other fights I watched, but like I said, with Charlo and John Jackson and Spence and Porter, that told me a lot. And their losses also told me a lot. Now, speaking about Charlo versus Canelo, Canelo basically won by cutting off the ring, pressuring him, putting Charlo on his back foot, like really doing some good body work and just focusing on that. Canelo was able to, do some level changing, going upstairs and downstairs and landing some powerful hooks, putting that pressure on him. That's really what got Charlo out of there. And I think, Canelo being shorter actually helped him get on the inside a little more, akin to how like Mike Tyson's height kind of helped him with his onslaught, with being able to really put them punches, together on the inside better because he was shorter than most of his opponents. And with Spence, like man, the beating that Terrence Crawford gave him was crazy. Like Terrence Crawford, what I noticed was that he was in southpaw. And once he was in southpaw, that was like half the battle. Like Spence had to adjust to somebody that fought in the same stance as him, which he doesn't usually, right? And Crawford was moving towards his left hand and kind of nullifying his left hand by shortening that distance. You would think that Spence would be able to land it, better as Crawford is moving towards the left hand. But no, it was like Crawford was moving towards his left hand was like a threat towards Spence and like kind of made Spence a little bit uncomfortable because Spence likes to make leverage and have some space to throw that left hand. But he didn't, he wasn't getting that leverage with Crawford being in southpaw and moving towards that left hand, which was like nullifying his offense. And yeah, like Crawford was using uppercuts, in the clinch on the inside. He worked his jab. He would shell up, lean into Spence, to nullify him going to the body. It's really cool stuff. Really, really surgical stuff from Crawford, doubling up with the jab after the crosses to keep landing and, to even drop him. Like, yeah, it was just but it was the strength and speed as well. Crawford was just stronger and faster. I don't think too many people were surprised about Crawford being faster, but definitely stronger. That was a surprise for us. And that's how Spence lost to Crawford. It took a little bit more of a surgical effort, to be honest, but Crawford was able to pull that off. Well, now that I've broken down the cons and the strengths of each guy, like I want to say that regardless, this would be a really good fight. But based on their tendencies, I just see like I really do see Spence being able to beat Charlo in a really good fight, though. Like it would be really good in spurts, but I think Spence would dominate it. Even with Spence going up to the next weight class, we saw Charlo how he did against the Canelo that technically weighed a little less than him and it was shorter. I feel like Spence could do the same thing, and Spence would probably use a lot of those tactics that Canelo used, like cutting off the ring with the hook, putting pressure, making Charlo get on his back foot a little more, just working the body like how it worked against Charlo. And with Charlo being like a slow starter, I feel like Spence would take advantage of that. Spence isn't, the greatest like opener as well, but like I just think it would be more detrimental to Charlo to start slow because Spence, he'll keep coming forward. He might be a little slow at first, but he'll keep coming forward. Whereas Charlo will always engage, back up, maneuver, circle around, re-engage, back up, maneuver, circle around. He does that a lot. And that will be his part of his downfall against Spence because Spence will just keep coming and keep making Charlo uncomfortable. I feel like, Spence will win the first round, just based off activity. Round 2 to 4, like, Charlo will be able, like rounds 2 to 4 in this fight. I predict that Charlo would be able to like have a flash knockdown where he'd hit him with a really good cross because that is, the cross is what most southpaws are susceptible to, but specifically Errol Spence, he's really susceptible to a cross. Although, he probably would, Charlo would get like a flash knockdown and win one of those rounds between rounds 2 to 4. Although that would be the case, like I think Spence would still eke out the majority of those rounds. He'll probably win like round 3 and 4 if he gets dropped in round 2. Charlo doesn't use like a lead right hand, he doesn't lead with that right hand a lot. He's very, very traditional, fights behind the shoulder, does the 1-2 and sets up his shots. He doesn't always like he wasn't like Sean Porter just shooting off a right hand or shooting off a hook like that. It'll always come behind something. That won't work as well against Spence. Those lead right hands land really well for Spence. That would be something that could drop Spence, but Spence would just reconfigure and be able to take, the majority of the rounds at that point. So from like rounds 1 to 4, I'd have it like Spence up 3 rounds, but Charlo Charlo getting a knockdown one of those rounds, so making it kind of close in the score. Then I'm thinking like, as the fight goes on, Charlo's gonna get more warmed up, but by the time he's getting more warmed up, Spence will already have put like, a lot of pressure on the body, a lot of pressure in general, hitting up his body, making him a little slower. So I think rounds 5 to 8, Charlo's gonna really show that he can't really fight that well on his back foot. Spence will have him on his back foot. Spence will keep pressuring him, you know, and he'll start doing that level changing that he does, where he starts landing that cross really hard to the chin, where you think he's gonna land to the body, but then Spence lands that. that left to the chin and it's going to hurt Charlo. I think that's really going to hurt Charlo. And when it comes to their pivots, I see Charlo like he doesn't pivot that well on the inside. And Sean Porter was able to like kind of pivot on the inside in that round 5 against their fight and was able to get Spence, briefly uncomfortable and off balance. I just feel like, where Charlo will be pivoting on the outside, Spence will keep pivoting on the inside. And it'll kind of negate that pivot that Charlo does. And Spence will be able to work his game plan even more because of it. And it's not like Charlo's going to be, working angles like Manny Pacquiao or something. He's going to try to find an angle and land like a quick shot or two, but he's not going to keep working it, how Pacquiao does or how other fighters do. Because his footwork's not quite the same or on that kind of caliber. Now, where I think it gets really hard for Charlo, if he were to fight Spence, is the rounds 9 to 11. Just like we saw with Canelo, Canelo was able to put that body work on him and slow him down and like he was able to negate his offense. Canelo was able to negate Charlo's offense with that body onslaught by the later rounds and was able to drop him and eventually beat him with relative ease. And I think that'll be the thing. That'll be the tail of the tape where Spence will be coming forward. Charlo won't be able to fight as good on the back foot. Won't be able to utilize his cross as well or his uppercuts as well. I think that Spence would eventually probably knock him out by round 11, whether it be by corner stoppage or by like a body shot. I think it would be competitive in spurts, but Spence would end up taking it due to the pressure, due to cutting the ring off, due to fighting better backwards, being able to take that onslaught from Charlo by fighting backwards better, using his head to like hide those body hooks while fighting inside, being able to clinch up Jermell Charlo and get close in and pivot more on the inside and inch his way closer and closer to a knockout. And yeah, I think Charlo will yeah, he won't be able to withstand it because he circles out, maneuvers a lot, resets himself a lot, and that's going to do a big disservice against Spence. Yeah, I think if they fought, ultimately it would be competitive in spurts, but it would be mostly a Spence dominated fight with maybe a flash knockdown by Charlo. But by like round 11, I think, Spence just gets him out of there. Even at 154, which is where the fight should happen if it does happen. But yeah, that's how I see it. That's how I see it would go down. And like I said before, we don't know if it's really going to happen. And it shouldn't happen right away. There should be a tune-up for these guys before that kind of fight happens. But, if that's what they want to do, then, in their primes, that's how I feel it would go. I do think that Spence would be able to get Charlo out of there by round 11. If not, go to like a split decision. Well, not even a split decision. It would be a unanimous decision for Spence. It could go to distance or it could end around 11. That's how I see it going, with Spence being the winner. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if that fight happens, but it would be a really good fight to see regardless. And you really can't tell how Spence is going to be coming back off of that loss from Crawford. You don't know how Charlo is going to be coming back from that loss from Canelo, and it's not really fair for them to fight each other right away. But, in their primes, this is how I got it going, and that's what I'm sticking with. Spence would beat Jermell Charlo in his prime, in both of their primes, by round 11. But we got a lot more fights on the horizon anyway. So this is Dolo Ren, and I'm signing off, I guess. There's not really left to say. I'm out. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.